When it comes to writing fantasy, the storyline or plot tends to move incredibly slowly for very good reasons. This is to incorporate backstory as well as new world development when developing a story from scratch. So there's a lot of information coming through in bite-sized pieces from the start to prevent information dumping. That's why if you want your readers or your viewers to buy into your story before they know anything about your world, you need to immediately hook them with your characters. When you're developing characters, it's essential that they are endearing, they're fighting for a cause, maybe protecting someone, whether they know the person they're protecting or not, or whatever else the case may be for your protagonist's journey. When it comes to Avatar the Last Airbender, this is a story that already has significant character and plot buy-in. You know these characters, everything about them, where they start, the transformations they go through, and who they eventually end up becoming. So the challenge in remaking something we all agree is epic fantasy and near perfection is how do we, given everything we know about the characters, the plot, and the setting, make it better? And the only answer is to add, expand, and enhance. Changing plot points outright isn't necessarily the best idea unless it's one or two minor aspects that won't have rippling effects through the rest of the story or consequences for the character that isn't intended. But when it comes to a show we all agree is perfection, we try our best to not change major plot points. And this might just be the ghostwriter in me who would rather restructure plot points than outright change them, especially when the original plot points are launch points for character development and continuity. So, how do you then take characters that people already love and make them even better? You do that by taking what you already know about them, so everything they already are, and you add. You layer in the complexity, you explore their backstory, or you explore their characters from a different perspective, either through the lens of a different character they may not have interacted with in the original, or by their explicit actions. You can also show us that they've done something we haven't seen them do before that adds to who they already are. But don't make them do completely different or out of character things. This will fail to establish who we know they are at their core. And it's going to have the viewer feel like something's off, even if they can't point out specifically what that is. That's even worse. Spoiler alert, for fiction writers, it's often why agents reject their book proposals. It's usually when something feels off or like it's not going to come together in the end. So if we begin our character analysis for Katara, and I want to begin with Katara because she's had, I would say, the most significant changes made to her character growth and arc and development in the new live action. So, for instance, let's start with some of the biggest changes to the plot that negatively impact her character. So, if you think about how you feel about Katara when you see her doing what she's doing, at first glance, the live action has made some seemingly small changes. And while it might seem as though they won't hurt, they eventually end up will. So the first plot point is that Katara is the one who initially breaks Aang and Appa out of the iceberg. In the original, she's trying to waterbend a fish out of the water, and Sokka distracts her with a misogynistic rant about her magical water abilities. And does she take it? Of course not. In the original, right off the bat, you see a young woman who knows not just right from wrong, but how to stand up for herself to her older brother. You never, across any of the three books, question her instinctual authority. It's accepted because her natural leadership abilities has her saying and doing the right things, and all the viewer thinks is, yeah, let's just go with what Katara says. In the live action, you just don't get this feeling. She comes across as being quite a dull and one-dimensional character. And in the animation, I don't think it's explicitly mentioned that Katara is younger than Sokka. I'm probably wrong about this, maybe just haven't paid attention over the 100 times I've rewatched the series, but it's a subtle assumption because it's not a focal point, meaning it doesn't influence anything. However, in the live-action remake, it's a prominent plot point. This literally, and I don't use the word literally lightly, but it literally changes Katara's character arc. And as for the dialogue, they may as well have written a line for Sokka to say, "You're younger, I'm older, you have to listen to me because I know what's best." The second plot point that was left out, that didn't just enhance but established Katara's badass, do-good, natural leadership abilities, was the interaction between her and Haru. Haru was meek and mild, afraid to use his earthbending because Fire Nation soldiers were capturing all the earthbenders from his village. But Katara encouraged him to use his earthbending to rescue an old man. She showed him that when you have special skills, you use them for good. It was one of her first defining moments as a teacher, a leader, an inspiration, and an influencer. And it really worked. Her ability to teach and nurture just got better and better. And it wasn't limited to Aang. It was with everyone she came into contact with. Katara rescuing Haru from the sea prison showed you how brave she was. And she got deliberately arrested to rescue Haru. So you get to see how far she's willing to go to fight for her ideals. That first speech on the Fire Nation prison ship about hope and fighting back, you see her spirit, you see her fire. There's no room for error to see exactly who she is. And as a result, in the live action, none of this ever happened for Katara, and she didn't get to establish that very important character arc. If we go into the third plot point, which was Katara's waterbending scroll, that was really disappointing having that plot point left out. It was handed to her by her grandmother instead of stealing it from the pirates, and it kind of sold her ridiculously short. In the animation, when she sees the waterbending scroll, she knew she had to have it. And there were two reasons for that. Number one, the scrolls were obviously stolen from the Water Tribe. And no, she didn't have the money to buy it back, but she knew it didn't belong to them. It's kind of like seeing global artifacts in the British Museum. It's the same feeling. And the second one is she's learning how to waterbend by trial and error. If she's going to learn and teach Aang along the way, she needs some sort of instructional manual, and this is the first of its kind she's ever seen. She's never been exposed to another waterbender who teach her. So this is all very different from the PTSD flashes back to literally the same repetitive scene of having her mother killed very dramatically in the live action. It didn't add anything to Katara's character. It just related her waterbending to her trauma. It was valuable real estate, time wasted that could have actually related it back to something that she was innately good at, and it didn't do that. So, all in all, it watches like a rough first draft reads. It's that point where you're just getting to know the characters you're writing about. The draft where you get the story down, but it's right before you start tweaking and injecting personality, personal goals and ambitions, pet peeves, or extreme dislikes. Basically who the characters are at their core and what they stand for. And in the first 2 hours of the remake, they have failed to achieve what the animation achieved in 1 or 2 episodes, maybe 40 minutes tops. First drafts often sketch out one-dimensional characters, but this is always fixed once the story is down and you can start allowing them to have these goals, hopes, dreams, and desires. Based on this, you'll see that when comparing the same characters, Katara in the original versus Katara in the remake, they could actually be telling you 2 completely different stories. And these are probably small changes that had these massive unintended consequences. And this is great because you often don't get the opportunity to compare one for one. And while that's not what we're looking for, the core elements should remain, if only for a sense of viewer or reader satisfaction, which is literally everything. If the creators invested a whole lot more into dialogue, delivery, and making sure the characters were at the forefront of the story instead of the story carrying them along, it may have been received a whole lot better. They had a killer cast and one of the best fan bases out there. They couldn't ask for more, and they could have had this in the bag. Ultimately, this has been an accurate representation of prioritizing the plot over the character. Should we do Zuko next?